Hello, good to see you. Pastor Sam with a reflection video on marijuana. Now, if you voted this last week, then you probably saw there were a few different, namely, measures on the ballot about marijuana. And I'll be honest with you, this video is probably as much for myself as it is for you, kind of working through my thoughts on this. I was a little taken aback at first, and it caused me to reflect upon whether this should be a thing or should not. And that's kind of what these videos are, thinking about different life issues and reflecting theologically upon them. So we're going to get to that kind of at the tail end of the video. We'll start talking about this theologically, but I wanted to work through the pros and the cons of it. Now, I voted a very definite way, but that is I'm not going to discuss that. It seems like the slight majority of the fine folks in our state felt like both recreational and medicinal use of marijuana was reasonable, and they voted in that very definite way. And so I kind of want to talk about this new phenomena that we will be experiencing in our state. There's a few things that concern me. There's also a few benefits that I see. And if you have known me long enough, you're not going to be surprised at all to find that I'm going to come down squarely in the middle. And I'm not going to say that this is the worst thing and that we're going to hell in a handbasket. And you're also not going to see me opening a marijuana dispensary. I'm going to come down clearly in the middle. So there we go. I saved you what's probably going to be a 20 or 30 minute video, and you can just go on your merry way right now. But let's kind of talk through these different things. Now, I think what's most troubling to me is the idea of the laws enacted by our federal government compared to this new law, which has been or will be. I'm honestly not sure when the law goes into effect. So I'm assuming that at some point this will be true. But there's a law passed by our federal government which prohibits any use of marijuana. And now there is a law passed by our state that says that both medicinal and recreational use is reasonable and fair. And this is extremely troubling. You Civil War buffs may see where I am going with this, but the idea of federal government power versus states' rights, state governmental power, was the reason for us fighting the Civil War. The federal government said that slavery was illegal, and there were certain states, some states all agreed with that and said slavery was illegal. Other states disagreed and said that slavery was legal. And the Civil War was fought to kind of reclaim those states and to exert the power of the federal government. And we as a country came to the conclusion that if the federal government passes a law, then that's how it is, right? So if the federal government says that slavery is illegal, then the states don't get to decide whether it is or not. That's just how it is, right? Slavery is illegal for everybody. Now, if the federal government should have no law about a certain thing, like how much water a person ought to ingest in a given day, right? Throwing out a ridiculous example, the federal government has not issued a law declaring that you must drink a certain amount of water. The states are able to make their own law about such a thing. Now, they probably wouldn't, because that's kind of a ridiculous thing to legislate, but the states were free then to decide for themselves whether they wanted to make a law or not. Now this troubles me greatly because we have sort of regressed into our pre-Civil War era selves, where the federal government has said marijuana is illegal, but now the majority of states have disagreed and said that it is legal. So who's in charge, right? And what is most troubling for me is not the thought that slavery is going to come back, because I think we've all kind of agreed that's a bad thing, but that sort of what's the point of the federal government? If the states can decide these things on their own, then why have a federal government, if we're not going to listen to what we as a collective nation have decided, I would like to not have to pay federal income tax. Think about that. Huh? If we as a whole collective nation decide something, then let's go by that, right? We as a whole nation said that slavery was illegal, and certain states agreed and other states disagreed. And we said that no, when the federal government says a thing, then that's how it is. And now we're not so sure who's in charge, and that troubles me the most. And since this is a theological reflection video, the underpinnings of this are obeying leaders. And now, which leaders do we obey? Right? Who's in charge? We've sort of lost that. What leader do I? Well, I guess I obey the leader who agrees with what I think. In which case, I'm not obeying any leader at all. I'm just obeying myself. And I'm kind of falling behind whoever happens to say what I agree with. And that's very, very troubling. I think that's the biggest issue for me. Now, regardless of what the issue is, we're regressing to our pre-Civil War era selves, and that's, I think, a very dangerous place to be. Anyway, so let's actually dig into marijuana. I know nothing about it, so I might use some weird phrases. I don't know. I went through and looked at both the people supporting this issue and the people opposed to this issue, and I want to kind of talk through what they say and why they either supported or opposed this measure, and discuss kind of the validity of these arguments. Now, what's curious is that both sides claim there will be an impact to our police time. And so I'm going to come down in the middle. There will probably be no either savings or increase in our police time. The side in favor says that we're going to save police time, that police won't have to book and appear before courts and deal with people on minor, their words, not mine, minor marijuana charges. However, the people against say that we're going to increase our police time and police respondents because we're going to have things like drug driving charges. We're going to have an increase in serious crime. So there will probably be no overall impact to our police time. Instead of busting people for possession of marijuana, they're instead going to bust those very same people for breaking into somebody's house while they're high, right? There's really both those arguments are kind of nullified. The police are still going to be arresting probably the very same individual. And I would posit, look at me using all these fancy words, posit that the type of person who would possess and ingest an illegal substance is the same type of person who, while under the effects of that now legalized substance, would commit illegal activities. That's kind of what I'm saying. So the type of person who breaks the law in regard to the possession of certain substances is kind of the same type of person who would now ingest those legalized substances, but be given to committing crimes while under their effect. So as far as saving or increasing our police time, I mean, they're just going to be doing other activities, right? It's not like we're going to be able to cut down and have one less officer on a shift. I don't think that's true. So those arguments on both sides sort of cancel each other out. Those are not good arguments when deciding where to come down on this. The next one is, and strangely, there's sort of this cancellation effect, which leads me to sit clear in the middle. Anyway, next one is the tax revenue. Now that this industry has been legalized, we are going to be able to collect tax revenue. And money is always a very important thing, right? You kind of need to have money to buy groceries and to like pay the rent. And so like money is a good thing to have. Now, the supporters of this bill claim that there is going to be $60 million of tax revenue by 2024. And that's a big number. Now, if somebody gave me $60 million, I would be extremely happy, right? That's a lot of money. I could do quite a few different things if I had $60 million. But I was curious to compare that number to our state budget. And now there's a little bit of difference because that 60 million is by 2024. So that's in 4 years. Our state budget for 2020 for this year was $4.8 billion. Okay. So we've got, now there's some difference because that's this year's budget and not the budget in 4 years. So I'm saying already there's some fudging of numbers. But if we think about increasing $60 million on a $4.8 billion budget, that is a 1.2% increase, which is basically a rounding error. Like, the tax revenue that we collect is not a reasonable justification for this proposal. Like, a 1% increase is not even the cost of inflation, or not cost of inflation, is not even keeping with the, I don't know the economic term, the depreciation of inflation, right? Because $1 next year is able to buy less than $1 this year. So increasing our budget by 1.2%, inflation erodes that, and it's a meaningless figure. It sounds like a lot of money, and I think some people were maybe swayed by, because like, if somebody gives me $60 million, that's not a 1% increase in my budget. That's like quite a big increase in my household budget. But as a state, we this year spend $4.8 billion. So 60 million is quite a small increase as far as that goes. And the people against this bill claim that we will have increased healthcare costs in emergency room visits, to increase our staffing, in paying for people who do not carry insurance. And so again, this increase in revenue that we collect is probably going to pay for the healthcare costs of people who are uninsured. So again, these two sort of cancel each other out. They're a wash. Neither one is a good reason to either support or defeat. I don't know. What's the opposite of support? Either way. All right, next one. Argument 4. Creating jobs. Creating jobs. Yes. I don't know as there is any disagreeing with that. We'll have to build marijuana dispensaries. Certain people will want to grow marijuana. But this is sort of a false situation. Now, what I mean by that is, consider a construction company today is probably performing some type of work, right? A construction company is not just sitting around twiddling their thumbs waiting for a bid, waiting to bid on a marijuana dispensary. They are already performing some work. The people who work for that construction company are already doing some work. So saying that there's going to be new jobs, like that a new construction company is going to start up just to build marijuana dispensaries, I mean, maybe that's true, but the construction workers are already working for a construction company. Like, the only way that it actually creates jobs is by drawing new people to the state to have an overall increase in the number of construction companies. And if that's the case, then those people are coming from a different state, and we're actually decreasing the overall number of jobs in that state. The only way that we create new jobs, really, I guess, is through immigration. I just thought about that. I was going to say by having babies, which is kind of a topic on my mind lately. But I guess through immigration, in which case we're potentially taking jobs from a different country. So it appears as if there is more work to do, but the people actually performing that work are already doing a job. The only way that it really creates jobs is if somebody is sitting on their sofa collecting welfare and is motivated to now be a marijuana grower or distributor, right? Then yes, we have created a new job. The person who was not working, who was sitting on their couch, is now a contributing member of society. But I find that to be extremely unlikely. The slogan of creating jobs is really people who were doing this type of work for a different thing, like people who were building houses before, are now also going to build the marijuana dispensaries. So we're not really creating new jobs. We're giving additional work to people who already have jobs. And so I kind of want to frame that in the proper way. So again, this is not an argument to either support or not support the bill. Let's see. Last one. This one doesn't have a counterpoint. The counterpoint is that it's not really a point. There we go. That's a good counterpoint. All right, last one in support is this idea of rebuilding lives. And I'm taking this terminology from the arguments in favor of the bill. So these are their words, not mine. And they were saying something like, if you smoked marijuana as a youth, you would be a criminal. And I don't know if it's a felony or not, again, showing my ignorance, but you would be a criminal. It would be hard for you to get a job, go to school, these type of things. Although now that I'm thinking about it, the bill says you have to be 21. So if somebody smokes marijuana as a youth, they're still going to be a criminal, and they're still going to have a hard time getting a job and going to school. So they've actually defeated their own point. I love it when people do that, because the bill that they have proposed says you must be 21 in order to possess and smoke marijuana. So if you do it as a youth, it's a criminal offense anyway, and they've defeated their own point. So I don't even have to do any work. I love it when people defeat their own point. It makes my job exceedingly easy. Now, what I thought was most curious, well, not most curious, because I already said that at the beginning. The second most curious thing came in the donations in opposition to this bill. And the one that really caught my attention was from the Avera Health System. Now, I'll be honest with you, I really reflected upon this issue, and I was absolutely uncertain. I did end up voting a very definite way, because after reflecting, I came to a conclusion. But one of our largest, maybe the largest, I don't know how they compare to Sanford, but one of our hospital systems in the state came out in public opposition to this bill, and through their public support in opposition to this bill. And that to me says a lot, that they believe as a company that this is going to have a detrimental effect upon the health of our people. And they would like this bill to be defeated because of, again, you kind of have to draw your own interpretation from this donation. That's what I'm doing. So I'm putting words in their mouth. They see this as more harmful to the public health than beneficial. That was again, biggest thing is federal rights versus states' rights. But second thing is the public health. And we have a public health provider coming out on a clear side as far as this goes. All right. So I haven't said two words about the theological importance of this. And so we probably ought to reflect upon that, at least somewhat. I'm going to pause. My throat is pretty dry, so I'm going to take a drink. And the theological issue at play is really our stewardship of God's gifts. And so I am going to compare the marijuana industry, which I know basically nothing about, to the alcohol industry, which, for those of you who don't know, I brew my own beer at home. So you can probably conclude where I come down on the use of alcohol. So I don't claim to know anything about the alcohol industry, but I do claim to know something about alcohol and the making and ingesting of beer. So I'm going to kind of, those two, the alcohol industry and the marijuana industry, seem to be very closely associated industries, right? Excuse me, some of the water. They are both, and what I mean by that is that they are both altering our consciousness. Consuming large amounts of alcohol, which is drunkenness, and God kind of comes down pretty squarely on that. I see having the same type of effect as consuming large amounts of marijuana. And so we can kind of extend, okay, God has talked about drunkenness as a misuse of his gifts, and we can kind of then apply the again, I'm showing my lack of understanding about marijuana, but whatever. The drunkenness, getting drunk on marijuana as then a misuse of God's creation. Now that also says that there probably is a reasonable use for it. And that's maybe a surprising thing to hear me say, but I certainly believe, I mean, I myself do it, that there is a reasonable use of alcohol. That in moderation, yes, it does alter our consciousness, right? Think about, people call it like a social lubricant. You go out to a party and people are usually having some alcohol, and it just helps it helps to facilitate conversation and engagement. And I think that it's a very good thing when used properly, when used in moderation, right? All those qualifiers. And so I could see the use of marijuana fitting in kind of that same niche, that it can also be a social lubricant when used in moderation, when used under our newly minted laws, that it could help to facilitate interaction, socialization, the strengthening of relationships and community. Now, don't get me wrong, just like with alcohol, there is plenty of room for abuse, for drunkenness, that type of thing. Alcohol, the abuse of alcohol also causes additional other detrimental behaviors, violent crime, domestic abuse, right? Personal abuse. Your liver only takes so much drunkenness before it's like, all right, buddy, I'm toast, and that means you're toast. So I also see marijuana having kind of fitting in, again, that same niche, that the misuse, the immoderate use of marijuana would cause violent crimes, would have detrimental effects upon the health of the individual. And so these are all things to consider as we are stewarding God's gifts. Now, as I spoke way long ago in a devotion, a marijuana leaf is an inanimate object. Now, it's a plant, so it kind of moves and grows and stuff. But that marijuana leaf, just like I talked about it in regard to dollar bills, that marijuana leaf is neither a good thing nor an evil thing. It can be used in a good way, or it can be used in an evil way, just like dollar bills. But I'm comparing it to alcohol, just like alcohol can be used in a good way or in an evil way. For instance, we consume alcohol here at Faith every week. Now, again, don't light your torches and grab your pitchforks. That is a very proper use of alcohol. I'm referring, of course, to the Lord's Supper, a very proper use of alcohol, actually commanded by our Lord that we do this in remembrance of Jesus. So don't hear me saying anything against the Lord's Supper. I heartily support the Lord's Supper. It is the medicine that heals the world, right? The point that I'm making is that is a proper use of alcohol, a proper use of this gift that God has given to us. God has given us the gift of grapes. He has given us the gift of yeast. Whew. Boy, I trust me, I brew my own beer. I know how this works. He has given us the gift of yeast that turn the sugars in either grains or grapes into alcohol, right? He has given us these gifts. He expects us to use them responsibly. He has given us the marijuana leaf. We as a society have now deemed that that is a reasonable thing. And again, that's another caution-causing issue, but we have decided that's a reasonable thing to do. And so we need to be using that as good stewards. We need to be using it in moderation, according to the laws of the land, making sure that for both ourselves and the people around us, that we are not causing detriment either to other people or to ourselves. And again, I said it way at the beginning of the video, and you could have saved what's now looking like 25 or 30 minutes. But thank you for sticking with me. It can be I think, a good thing. And it can also be a very bad thing. And I'm going to come down squarely in the middle. That, I guess we'll have to see how all of this shakes out. I'm very interested in how the next few years look in terms of marijuana industry growth in South Dakota, as well as the general consumption of marijuana and the effects that it may have, either good or bad, upon our society and our life here in South Dakota, and especially here in Pierre. I am very interested in seeing that. And I'm going to kind of cautiously reserve judgment as far as calling it a good thing or a bad thing. Right now I'm in the middle. I can see it being kind of that social lubricant helping to facilitate interaction with other individuals. I can also, much like alcohol, see it causing very violent crime and bad things here in our state. What I'm going to end on, the last thing that I find troubling, I think that was the word. Oh, I got to adjust my posture here. The last thing that I find troubling is this idea of us as individuals, and I'm using these words very specifically, not deciding on what is good or evil. God has already kind of called the shot on that one. But on us as individuals deciding what is lawful and unlawful. I find that to be very troubling. And why that is the case is that as we make these decisions, what do we base those values on? How do we decide if a thing should be lawful or unlawful? And what I've seen over the past decade, really, as certain other things have become lawful, is that there is no basis for it. Somebody wakes up one morning and feels a certain way, and they're like, hey, other people should be allowed to feel this way too. Let's change the law to let other people feel this way. And so yesterday morning, the fine residents of the state of South Dakota woke up, and 53% of you felt that marijuana ought to be a reasonable thing to do. And we enacted in judicial manner the rights that we have as citizens of this fine state, and also as citizens of this fine country. But I don't find that to be troubling. What I find troubling is that we are assessing the lawfulness and unlawfulness, and that there really is no standard that we have. And that's, again, there are many troubling things, as I've said in this video. Somebody could count up how many times I've used that word. I'm sure it would be in the 20s or 30s, right? That it's just kind of how I feel this morning. There's no anchoring that I have for that. There's no I'm trying to allude to God's word without saying it explicitly, but I guess I just have to. There's no foundation on which I build. I am utterly adrift at sea, and I happen to see, oh, there's a good looking island over there, so I paddle my way over there, and then I'm like, oh, there's another good island over there, so I change course and I paddle my way over there. The one adrift at sea is utterly adrift and has no solid foundation, is tossed to and fro by every wind of change. Sounds like something St. Paul said. While the person who has some foundation, at least some external foundation, whether that be the Word of God or something else, the person who has some external, non-personal foundation has certain measures of good and evil, and is therefore able to draw consistent conclusions regarding what should be lawful and unlawful. I fear that we have no such foundation. By we, I mean the residents of this country, and really even the residents of this state, have no overall foundation by which we can all agree upon certain actions or inanimate things as lawful or unlawful. So if somebody wakes up tomorrow and thinks, you know what, I like using cocaine, I think that should be a reasonable thing to do. By the way, there's a state in our union that feels that way. Let's see what other people think about that. I'll end where I began. You know what? I like the idea of owning other people. I think slavery should be legal. I'm going to find some other people who feel that way, and we're going to legalize slavery. Now, I don't want you to think that, I don't think that's actually going to happen, but that is certainly possible. It is certainly possible that somebody would feel strongly about something that even a vast majority of people would deem to be evil, but because they woke up and felt that way and found other people who also felt that way, they now have the structure and authority and even, dare I say, right to make lawful things that are objectively evil. And that is a very worrisome place to be. So I guess I'll end this way. Marijuana as an inanimate thing is neither good nor evil. And I can see certain people using it in moderation. I can see certain people using it in a reasonable manner, much like there are certain people who use alcohol in a reasonable manner. I can also very easily see, just like with alcohol, certain people using it immoderationable fully. I made that word as ridiculous as I could, without moderation, using it in extreme circumstances and causing, much like with alcohol, violent crime. And again, the idea of we as the residents of South Dakota have preempted the laws that we as the residents of the United States have already passed to be very troubling. And upon what foundation did we make this decision? That we just woke up one morning and thought a certain way. The next few years will be very telling, I think, as to the direction that our state and our nation are headed. So stay tuned. We'll be discussing these things each week. There we go. I'm going to end abruptly. God's peace be with you. I'll see you next time.